Today's daf we're going to be learning is Nedarim Daf Lamed. Today's daf is dedicated in memory of Aryeh Shupak, who was murdered in yesterday's terror bombing, and for Fuash Lema to all those injured. Rough day, and with that, we will keep on learning. Okay. We are going to review very quickly from the end of the Mishnah. We learned the Mishnah at the bottom of Kaf Chet Amud Aleph. If somebody says, Harei netiot ha'elu korban ad shikatzitzu, these, whatever grows here will be, the sapling will be sanctified until it gets cut. Then according to, we saw Machlok at Bar Pada, we said, Ein lahem pidyon, they cannot be redeemed. What does it mean they cannot be redeemed? So Bar Pada said, you can redeem them, but as soon as you redeem them, they're going to be sanctified again. Ula had, and then the debate between him and Ula was really on the second part, which is, or debate really what the debate was, but let's just stick with that, which is, once you cut them, according to Bar Pada, you redeem them once, and that's enough. According to Ula, you don't even need to redeem them because the Kedusha just left, which is what the Gemara started with yesterday. What do you mean the Kedusha just leaves? Don't you generally need to redeem them? So that was a question we dealt with, and then we brought different sources, and then we actually brought the source that we thought was a difficulty for Ula, ended up being a difficulty for Bar Pada once we explained it, and then we tried to deal with that. Anyway, we made some distinctions, Kedushat Aguf, Kedushat Damim. Okay. We're going to leave that all from yesterday as yesterday. Now we're going to move on to the next sugya. Again, connected with Bar Pada. I'm going to start off with a story, which is actually a structure that we see in a lot of Talmudic stories. It's not even a story. It's really more, there was a discussion. But what happened was, Yativ Rabbi Avin, I'm starting 3 lines from the bottom of Kaftan Amabet. Yativ Rabbi Avin v'Rabbi Yitzchak b'Rebbe, kamei de Rabbi Yirmia. So these two rabbis, Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Yitzchak b'Rebbe, were learning with Rabbi Yirmia. He was their teacher. They come and named Rabbi Yirmia, and Rabbi Yirmia falls asleep. Okay, this happens a lot in these stories where the students are sitting with the rabbi, and the rabbi falls asleep in the middle. Yatre v'kamri. So they continue their discussion without the rabbi. Libar Pada de'amar peda'an chozrot v'kodshot. They suggest the following. According to Bar Pada, who thinks that as soon as you remove the kedusha, and by redeeming it, the kedusha comes right back because of your statement, your declaration. Tifsho debai Rav Hoshaya. We can actually get an answer to this question that Rav Hoshaya asked from using Bar Pada. What was his question? Hanoten shte prutot liisha. A man gives a woman 2 coins. An unmarried woman gives her the 2 coins. V'amarla be'echat, with one of these coins, hitkadshili hayom. I want to betroth you right now. Ube'echat, with the second one, hitkadshili. Get ready for this. La'achar sha'agar. With the second one, I want to betroth you after I divorce. So I'm right now giving you, okay, if you think about when people complain about prenuptial agreements, right? Why are we talking about divorce at the time of marriage? This is an even stranger one where he basically says, I'm going to betroth you. And I'm going to say that as soon as I divorce you, if in the event that I divorce you, this kiddushin will kick right in and you'll be betrothed to me again. Now, why on earth someone would do that, right? Maybe he's trying to say, there's no way I'll ever divorce you. And here I'm going to prove it by basically making a second betrothal right now. So basically the question that, now we don't actually have the question, but the question really is obvious, which is Rav Hoshaya wanted to know what happens in this situation. If in the event he goes ahead and divorces her, is she immediately betrothed? So come these 2 rabbis, Rabbi Avin and Rabbi Yitzchak b'Rebbe, who say, you know what? If Bar Pada says you redeem it, and immediately the sanctity that you said from the beginning, ad shiktitzu, right, will kick right in. So likewise here, as soon as you divorce her, this man divorces her, the kiddushin that he said in the beginning will kick right in and she'll be betrothed. So hachinami, likewise here, the havu kiddushin, they say it must be kiddushin. In the meanwhile, and this always happens in these stories when the rabbi falls asleep, Rabbi Yirmia, in the meanwhile, Rabbi Yirmia wakes up and hears what they're talking about. Maybe he heard them the whole time, right? Lots of people fall asleep and, but they're kind of listening anyway. Amar lehu, he says to them, and this is always what happens in these stories, what are you talking about? You're comparing apples and oranges. They're not the same. Now, why are they not the same? And this part is a little bit more complicated. And Batsheva, it's exactly, we're going to get to what you're saying, which is, there's a difference between, now the Gemara doesn't word it the way you're wording it, Batsheva, but in the end, the commentaries explain that's what they mean. There's a difference between you redeeming your own produce, your own fruits, let's say, we're talking about the fruits on this tree. You redeem them, and you're the one who said they're going to be sanctified, so they automatically become sanctified. That works. But when someone else redeems them, so let's go back to the case of the fruits. You say these are sanctified, and instead of you redeeming them, someone else comes along and redeems your fruits. Now, at that point, what happens? The fruits, right, no longer have sanctity. The money has the sanctity, but since it was, let's say I came along to your produce and I did it, those fruits now belong to me. So your original statement of these are going to be sanctified until they get cut is no longer relevant because they're not yours anymore. I basically end up acquiring them. So likewise with the woman is like a case. Now it's a little bit tricky because it's not like she was redeemed by somebody else. Her husband divorced her. So what does it mean she was redeemed by somebody else? So apropos what you wrote in the chat, Batsheva, which is what happens is it can't kick in automatically. Some of the commentators explain why not. Why is it like someone else? Because when the husband divorces her, she now is no longer under his, in his reshut, in his domain, which means what? Well, theoretically, the kiddushin puts her right back, and then she's a free woman. He could theoretically do the kiddushin. However, she needs to agree to it, right? Like we say, it takes two to tango. You can't just, it's not just this automatic action of, oh, my kiddushin is in place. At this point, she leaves his domain, which is the important part, because once she leaves his domain, she has to re-accept the kiddushin again. So it can't kick in automatically because she's an active partner there. And if she doesn't agree, then there's no kiddushin. And therefore, the kiddushin can't kick in automatically. It's more similar to a situation. It's not exactly pida'u machirim, but it's more similar to a situation where pida'u machirim, because he doesn't have full rights, just like someone else. If someone redeemed my stuff, then I wouldn't have full rights to it anymore. I wouldn't have any rights to it anymore. Likewise, he doesn't have full rights to her anymore because they're no longer married. And therefore, he can't just say, oh, kiddushin is automatic. What about her? She needs to agree. So now we're going to see this inside, not exactly what I explained because they don't really explain it. But Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan said, Pida'anhu chazrot b'kdoshot. If he himself, the owner, redeemed them, they would go back and become sanctified. But pida'u machirim ein chazrot b'kdoshot. So the first thing he says is he makes this comparison that we made before, which is the difference between if he redeems them himself or if someone else comes along and redeems them. And furthermore, he said, Isha kipta'u acherim dami. And a woman with kiddushin is like, again, it's not the same, but it has the same laws because she's like someone who other people redeemed her, because again, it's not all up to him. Itmar Nami, it was also said, Am Rabbi Ami, Am Rabbi Yochanan. This is basically another confirmation of the statement. Here they don't make reference to the woman, but they do make reference to the difference between if the owner redeems it or someone else redeems it. Okay, new Mishnah. Now we get to really, really easy stuff and very interesting in terms of what does language include, what doesn't it include. When I read this page, I think of sets, like in mathematics, and you learn what's part of this set, what's not part of this set. That's a very easy way to understand what's going on here. We're going to have a slew of Mishnayot and Gemaras on each one, very short, very easy daf, which is if somebody says X, what is included in X? Okay, what people are included, what people are not included. Hanodir mi'ordayam. These are all cases where somebody says, I will not benefit from a group of people. And the question is, who's in that group? Who's not in that group? Hanodir mi'ordayam, mutar b'yoshvei hayabasha. If you take a vow not to benefit from those who go in the water, right? Seafarers, however you call them, right? People go on boats. Mutar b'yoshvei hayabasha. You're permitted to people who live on land. They don't go out on boats. But miyoshvei hayabasha, if you say the reverse, from those who live on land, asur miyordei hayam, sheyordei hayam bichlal yoshvei hayabasha, right? This sounds just like laws of sets. Who's included in the set of people who live on land? Even people who go traveling on boats, because people who travel on boats ultimately come back to live on land, right? They don't live on boats all year long. Although I will say that when I was out in the Far East, I did see people who live on boats all year round, and maybe someone like that would really not be called a yoshvei yabasha. I would think definitely, right? If you live in a boat all year, so you're definitely not a yoshvei yabasha. even if you come to the Yabashah here and there. It sounds like people who live on land. But obviously, in the time of the Mishnah, they didn't know people who did that. Maybe there were, but not where they were living. We're going to see the main and the punchline, at the end of this whole sugya, at the very end of today's daf, is going to talk about Nedarim halach achal lashon b'nei adam. Nedarim follow the language of the people at whatever given point you're living, wherever you're living. So it goes by the language of the person who said the neder, what the general jargon is, which is why all these Mishnayot are really not relevant anymore, because it really all depends on where you live and what that means where you live. In fact, the Rambam doesn't even quote some of these things exactly because they're not relevant, because what language they use then is not relevant to the language we use now. Okay, so now here comes this next line, which isn't exactly clear which line it's referring to. Lo ka'ela sholchim me'ako leyafo. When we talk about people in the boats, we're not talking about people who go from Akko to Yafo, okay, which is not a far distance. Ela b'misha darko lefaresh. We're talking about people who go far distances. So now we're going to have to understand what this means. The Gemara starts off, Rav Papa v'Rav Acha b'Reid Rav Ika, chad matnei hareisha v'chad matnei hasefa. There's two lines in the Mishnah. The first line is, if you say Yordei Hayam, right, the people of seafarers, you're permitted in people who live on land and don't go on boats. But if you say people who live on land, that's going to include the seafarers. So now let's talk about which line this refers to. If you say this line about it's not the people from Akko to Yafo, it's the people from, right, who go far distances. So now you would say like this, we're now back to the Resha. If you say seafarers, you're permitted for those who live on land, right? You can benefit from all those people, only people who are seafarers. Now, Habi or Yamasu would be obvious. They're saying you're permitted by people who live on land. You're obviously, they need to say this, forbidden to people who are seafarers. But what does seafarers include? We're now going to limit it. Lo ka'ele, moving now already to Amubet, lo ka'ele ha'olchim me'Akko leYafo, not those who are going from Akko to Yafo, to halen yoshvei abashaninu. If you go on a short boat ride, that's not considered seafarers. When we talk about seafarers, we mean Ela Mibisha Darko Lefaresh. Okay, we're talking about people who maybe cross the Mediterranean. We're not talking just going on a short boat ride. So we basically say again, if you say seafarers, not only does it not include people who live on land, it also doesn't even include the people who take short boat rides. But if you learn it on the latter part of the Mishnah, then it reads like this. Now, the latter part is, the Gemara helps you out. They quote it again. So if you talk about people who live on land, you're including even the people who go out on boats. They have to add an important word here. It's not including those people. It's not only including those people. You have to add the word only, bilvad. Not only, right? If I say people who live on land, I'm not only including people who go on short boat rides, even people who go on long boat rides. Because in the end, they end up going on land and they end up living on land. They just take long boat rides. Okay, again, right? This could include all sorts of people. This could include, I'm thinking of people who we had a wedding in our house not so long ago. It was a situation of people who live on a boat basically most of the year. Okay, they live, actually it's on a yacht. Okay, it's a little bit different. But like you could have people like that, but they also do live on land. It's not like they always live on their yachts, right? Not like the people in the Far East that I saw, where that's really where they lived all year long. So, if the Gemara had seen people like that, they might have thought differently. Okay, so now again, so this line could be read in two ways. It could be either saying, when we say that Hanodir mi Yordei Hayam, you're permitted b'yoshvei Yabasha, right? And you're forbidden b'Yordei Hayam, right? So again, Yorder mi Yordei Hayam means only people who go on far boat rides, and it doesn't include these people at all. Or when we say Yoshvei Yabasha, we're even including the people who go on far boat rides, and of course we're including the people from Akko Yafo. Next Mishnah. Hanoder miro'eh hachama. If you say, I will not benefit from those who see the sun. So now you might think that must exclude blind people who don't see the sun. Comes the Gemara and says, asur af besumin. Even blind people are included in your neder. Can't benefit from them as well. Shelo nitkaven ze ela lemisha chama ro'eh otan. What did you mean, people who see the sun? You meant people who the sun sees you. Obviously, the sun doesn't have eyes, but we'll see what this means in a minute, who is excluded. So first of all, they want to know, how do you know that's what they mean? So the Gemara says, my taima, what's the reason we assume this isn't including blind, that this includes blind people, even who can't see the sun? If you wanted to say, I'm only benefiting from people who see and not people who are blind, then you should have said, I won't benefit from those who see. Why did you say see the sun? You must have meant something different. Lafuke, so what did you mean? Who doesn't the sun see? Dagim v'ubarim, fish or under the water. I mean, we know the sun goes through water, but assumption is the water basically blocks the sun from seeing, so to speak, the fish. And fetuses, interesting, right? Fetuses can't be seen by the sun because they're enveloped in the body of the mother. Now, why you would think how someone would benefit from a fetus, I'm not really sure, but anyway, food for thought, what that means. Okay, so that must be what you're including. Next one, this is a really strange one, hard for us to understand because we don't understand the lingo, but it's an obvious situation where if you lived then, you probably knew what they meant. Hanoder mishchorei harosh. If you say, I'm not going to benefit from dark-haired people. Now, I would say that nowadays, what would we think? Okay, you mean black hair, brown hair, right? But maybe it wouldn't include blondes. I don't know. But that's not what the Gemara says. Asur b'karchin u'ba'alei sevot. Okay, even if someone's bald, they're still called shchorei harosh. Okay, hope for all your bald people. And if you have white hair, you're also still included. Okay, so it includes the elderly, like you might have thought maybe it means only youthful people who don't have gray hair. Maybe it means, right, it could mean a lot of things. So what they basically say is, right, so it includes even people who have no hair, even people who have white hair. So why do you call them shchorei harosh? Who's the category? Who's in that set? Umutar b'nashim u'b'ktanim she'ein nikraim shchorei harosh ela anashim. Basically, the term shchorei harosh was a term used to depict men. Dark-haired people is what they used for men. Okay, now, why they did this? Good question. And the Gemara is going to try to figure out why. Whether this is true or not, what the Gemara says, I'm going to point out, it might not necessarily be the reason, because again, the Gemara is coming later and they're living in a different place. And clearly they didn't really understand this term because they had to ask, why is this? So it wasn't obvious to them that shchorei harosh obviously means men. Probably in the time of the Mishnah, that was a term. And in fact, safrai, this is like a great place to open safrai, because clearly this has to do with behavior. First of all, he quotes some places where they call men shchorei harosh, other places and sources where it's clear that was a term that meant men. He also points out something interesting, which is kind of obvious, but in European countries, let's say, many people are blonde, light-haired. And this is a clear proof that Jews, right, I mean, probably other ways to prove it, but the Jews then clearly were darker haired for the most part, rather than light haired. And that's why men were called dark haired people, because most men were dark haired. So obviously this was just a term that was used for men. So the Gemara is going to try to figure out why and how and all that. So my time, midaloka amar. So first of all, how do we know that it also will include bald people or white-haired people, midaloka amar mi ba'alei se'al, because it doesn't say people with hair. If they wanted to exclude bald people, they would say people who have hair. In fact, they said shchorei harosh seems to indicate even people who don't have hair. Umutar b'nashim u'b'ktanim she'en nikraim shchorei harosh ela anashim. So now the Gemara says, my timer, why is this? So they say, anashim zimnin demakasu reshayu v'zimnin demegali reshayu. Sometimes men cover their hair, sometimes they don't cover their hair. Aval nashim la'olam mikasu, uktanim la'olam migalu. Women always cover their hair, and young children never cover their hair. So therefore, basically, you have to take this a step farther, which is, therefore, children were called migulei harosh, uncovered hair people. The women were called michusei harosh, covered hair people, because they always covered their hair. This might be a proof, by the way, that women covered their hair once they became age of 12, even if they weren't married, which used to happen. It developed later that it was only married women, or again, there's different sources that indicate one or the other, but even the Shulchan Aruch paskins that women who are non-married, it comes up in the Rambam and it's quoted in the Shulchan Aruch, even non-married women cover their hair. Okay, most communities don't hold by this anymore, but it does, that seemed to have changed over time. So now the obvious question, and this is what Adina is pointing out, is it seems from here that men didn't necessarily cover their hair. Now, what does it mean to cover your hair? So some people say this means they don't cover it fully, okay, because kippah doesn't cover all your hair, depending on what size kippah you wear, but right, kippah doesn't fully cover your hair, and maybe that's what it is. Some people say maybe this is a source that men didn't really cover their hair at all, and the kippah was a later development, right? It's unclear when this whole idea of wearing a kippah developed. It's a whole, interesting development of it historically. This would be a source to possibly strengthen the fact that men didn't always wear kippahs, right? That it depends also how you understand. Sometimes they cover, sometimes they don't cover, which could mean also they didn't wear their kippahs all the time, or it could mean some people cover, some people don't cover, right? And it means maybe it wasn't a practice that everybody was doing, which definitely seems from the earlier sources that it wasn't a practice everyone was doing. It seems to have developed a little bit differently. Right. It says covering the head and not the hair. That's true also. Anyway, it's interesting. Again, it's not necessarily clear that the way the Gemara understands it is really what was meant in the Mishnah. I think just in the time of the Mishnah, they called people shcholei harosh. That was just a term used to talk about men. Men are called shcholei harosh, dark-headed people. But even if you weren't necessarily dark-headed. Anyway, then you can see what the Gemara goes into. And it shows testimony about women covering their hair, about men covering their hair and all that. So it's very interesting. So this is a big source by people trying to defend, men who do cover the, wearing a kippah and why it's important. And then they have to try to figure out what we do with the source, because it really does seem to put it kind of less important than we might think it is. Okay, next. Hanodir min hayilodim, last Mishnah for today. We're now going to differentiate between yilodim and noladim. Yilodim, they're going to assume means those who were born already. Noladim is nolad, right? Something new that's born is talking about people who weren't born yet. So if you're noder min hayilodim, okay, so we have two sets of people. There's people who were born already, and there's people who weren't yet born. And maybe we don't even only mean people, we mean animals. So hanoder min hayilodim, ones that were born, mutar benoladim. They're permitted to anyone who's born after the vow is taken. Min hanoladim, if you say who will be born, asur min hayiludim. According to the rabbis, that includes who will be born, not only talks about will be born, but anyone who has been born already. We'll see later in the Gemara why they think that this, where they get this from the wording, or what they really mean then. If they're saying both future and past, then who's it excluding? Rabbi Meir matir af beyilodim. Rabbi Meir permits even those who were born already. Now, even is a very weird word, and the Gemara is going to question it because even sounds like both. But what he really means to be saying is if you say future, then it's only future. Only those who will be born, but you're actually going to be permitted for whoever was born. V'chachamim obrim lo nitkaven zeh. Here comes the explanation. The rabbi is saying, no. When you said noladim, who will be born, what you meant to say was not specifically because they haven't been born yet. This is supporting the first opinion. It's someone who is generally born, okay, as opposed to someone who comes out of an egg, like a chicken. Okay, we're going to see like fish and birds. It's going to be the last line of the Gemara today. They're going to say it's excluding fish and birds who are not born in the same way that humans and other mammals and other animals are born. Rabbi Meir lo mebaya noladim elamiman asur. So again, I told you this language of Rabbi Meir doesn't make sense. Rabbi Meir says if you say from the noladim, those who will be born, the rabbi said it's forbidden to both groups, right? We have two sets, already born, not yet born. So rabbis say it's forbidden to both groups. Rabbi Meir says it's permitted even to those who were born, which makes it sound even means, and also to the other group. So Rabbi Meir, who are you forbidding if you said who will be born, if you think it excludes people who will be born and it excludes people who were already born? So they say must be the af doesn't really mean isn't used in the right way. And there must be words missing, and this is how it should be read. Hanoder min hayilodim mutar benoladim. We're back now to Tanach, first opinion. This is just a repeat. If you say yilodim, those who were born, you're mutar benoladim. Okay, anyone who will be born is not included. Min hanoladim, if you talk about future, asur beyilodim, you're going to be forbidden also the people in the future and also the people from that were already born. Rabbi Yirmia, here comes the change. Af hanoder min hanoladim mutar beyilodim. Even the one who says future is also going to be permitted to the people in the past. Meaning, why even? Well, in other words, let's go back to the rabbis. The rabbis are imbalanced because they're basically saying past refers only to past, future refers to future and past. So it comes from Meir and he says, no, even future refers only to future, just like past refers only to past. That's really, it sounds very complicated from the words, but it's super simple. He's basically saying, just like past meant only past, also future means only future. And these sets are separate sets. You say noladim, you mean future. You say yilodim, you mean past. And then you're going to be permitted in the opposite category of people. Now we start with a different question, which is, wait a minute. The Mishnah was clear that if you say yilodim, it's past. If you say noladim, it's future. Comes Rav Papa says Tabai. You think noladim, this Mishnah thinks that noladim is future, will be born. But I'm going to quote you a pasuk from Breshit with Yaakov when he's with his grandsons, Ephraim and Menashe and Yosef. What does he say? Says to Yosef, Shnei banecha hanoladim lecha be'eretz Mitzrayim, your two sons that were born to you in Egypt. Noladim, and it was born. They're obviously alive. They're sitting in front of Yaakov. Not that they will be born in the future. Hachinami di mityaladanhu. There's a few changes in the words here. It should be mityaladan according to the Bach. Also, you think here this means they will be born? Of course not. They were already born. The elamai now comes Abai and retorts back to him. Okay, you want to pull out psukim in the Tanach? Well, elamai, you want to say this also should be changed. Di'it yale mashma, that they were already born is what you want to say. Noladim means that against what the Mishnah says. Elamayata dechtiv hine ben nolad lebeit David Yoshiyahu shmo. In the beginning of Sefer Melachim, it talks about it's the famous story with the Navi Sheker, the false prophet. It comes up in Malachim Aleph, Perek Yud Gimel, and it says there's this prophecy. This Navi comes and he says there will be a son born to the house of David, and his name is Yoshiyahu. This is in the time of Yeravam ben Nevat, after the Malchut splits, the kingdom splits, and he's obviously talking about a future point. Okay, now you didn't need the Gemara to tell you this, but Hachinami Dahava, what you want to say? He was already born. His father wasn't yet alive. Okay, forget about the fact that this happens many, many, many years later. And it's obvious time passed, but they're pointing out there's no way he could have been born because his father wasn't yet born. Okay, if his father's not born, of course he can't be born. And therefore, right, it's obviously talking about some future point. So you want to prove to me from Yaakov that Nolad is on the past. I'm going to prove to you from the Navi that Nolad is on the future. So, how can we explain this? It could mean past, it could mean future, but big line here, Nedarim halach achar l'shon b'nei adam. But when it comes to vows, in other words, we can't learn out. We always, in other words, I even sometimes kind of pointed out almost in a kind of funny way that sometimes when they want to prove something, even they want to prove something that happens in the world, something, you could prove from the natural world and things you see, they prove it from psukim, right? The Gemara loves to prove things from a verse in the Torah. It's their best form of proof. Here comes this big line that says when it comes to Nedarim and language used in the Neder, you can't use Tanach at all. It's not a factor because language changes, and the language someone uses to make a vow is based on the language used at that particular time in that particular place. And therefore, don't try to question me from a pasuk in the Tanach, because that's not a relevant factor. In the Tanach, you're right. Nolad could mean past, nolad could mean future. But obviously, in the time of the Mishnah, nolad meant future, who will be born. Last thing for today, like they said, when he said noladim, they meant not who will be born in the future, but beings that are born, okay, which comes to exclude fish and birds, right? The Ran says, what's the difference? They're not created in their mother's wombs, and they're in eggs. They hatch. It's a different kind of way of being birthed, and therefore that's what he meant to exclude. I will benefit from them, but I will not benefit from any other beings that are actually born in the way that, similar to the way humans are born. With that, we'll finish our daf, and we're going to get to lots more language issues coming up. Like our next one is Hanoder Mishoftei Shabbat. What does that mean? Me'ochle shum, those who eat garlic. Okay, we're going to have some interesting things. What these include, what is included, what isn't included, and again, the central idea being, and that's why what is written here, all the technicalities are not necessarily relevant nowadays, because we might use words very differently, and the words we use might mean something different. That will finish today's daf. Have a great day, everyone.